Hey everybody, it's Dave Dugdale, learningvideo.com. Thank you so much for purchasing this course. You're going to learn a ton over the next about 6 hours. There's going to be a lot of tests you're not going to have to run because I'm going to show them to you, which should save you like weeks, if not months of time, getting the best image out of this camera that you can. All right, you should have no buyer's remorse whatsoever after buying this camera. From the 4K, the steady shot inside, to the fact that this thing can pretty much see in the dark. It's a fantastic camera. All right, this is the beginner level course for the most part. I'd say 5 out of the 6 hours is going to be very beginner level. So if you've never owned a camera before, I'm going to explain everything like you've never owned a camera before. But when I get to S-Log, that chapter is going to be very detailed and very advanced. I'm going to kind of expect that you're going to know how to read vector scopes, waveform monitors, stuff like that. It's going to tools to help us basically use S-Log more efficiently. So what I'd say, if you're a brand new beginner, skip that chapter entirely. I don't want to confuse you at that point. Maybe after 6 months to a year of using the camera, and perhaps you're looking to get more dynamic range out of the camera, at that point, come back and watch the chapter on S-Log. All right, I'm going to be pretty much covering everything in the manual as it pertains to video. I'm going to recover some of photography related items because there's going to be some time-lapse items that we're going to do that create into videos. But this manual doesn't cover everything. So if you don't hear me talk about it, which is a possibility, and you don't find it here, there's a link below to the online manual. Basically what you have to do is there's a search bar. You have to type in an item, whatever you're looking for, and you'll find it there. It's much more comprehensive than what you see here. All right, like I said before, this course could be about 6 hours long. I know that because I did a course on the A7R2, which I'm actually filming this with. It'll be good to know when I change cameras. There's actually a camera up here out of frame. I'll let you know what that is too when we get to that point. But what happens is if you get the course like 11 hours long, it's just too long. I've taken those type of courses like on color grading and I can't even finish it. It's just too long. So I think the sweet spot is around 5 or 6 hours. There's going to be some things I'm going to cover quite quickly, like when it comes to the App Store, or Wi-Fi, stuff like that, which I think I'll cover it a little bit, but I don't think you have to get too much detail, because what I want to do is use a lot of that time, of that 5 or 6 hours, on color grading, on S-Log, on creative styles, picture profiles. In fact, the A7R2 course, that chapter on creative styles and picture profiles is about 2 hours long. Also, the menu chapter is coming in probably around an hour and a half, 2 hours long as well. Don't be tempted to skip that chapter because there's going to be a lot of stuff in there. I'm going to demonstrate codecs. I'm going to demonstrate a lot of stuff in the menu chapter. And if you know anything about this camera already, the menu is being quite confusing, and I will try to help the best I can in terms of eliminating that confusion. Quick, I want to talk about things I'm not going to cover. One of the things is like accessories, like how to use a 3-axis gimbal. I mean, just the settings alone, the PID settings, that could be a course in itself that's probably 5 or 6 hours long. So I'm not going to be covering accessories. I'm not going to tell you how to tell a story. I'm not going to tell you how to do a wedding video, corporate video, a documentary, those type of things. I mean, I don't even really do documentaries. I do a lot of corporate videos, but I can't get into storytelling. I can't talk about editing. We're going to talk about color grading because we're going to talk about S-Log, but I just want you to know, if you've come here looking to learn how to tell a story, this is not that. It's more of a technical course on how to operate the camera. All right, so we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to show everything in the box really quickly. I started off with a real wide shot here because I thought you guys would be interested. This is the A7S original with the 55mm on the overhead shot. So what's great about this camera is there's only one camera, not unlike some other manufacturers, because this is a world camera, meaning it'll shoot PAL as well as NTSC. So everybody should have the same exact thing in their box for the most part. It doesn't come with a lens. I don't think there's really any sort of kit lens that it comes with. All right, first up, this is all your paperwork. You got all of your manuals and a few other things, registration cards that are in your box. All right, next up is your camera strap. To be honest, I never use it. I actually even take off these little strap hooks that go on here. If you leave them on, they can kind of dangle and make noise as you move the camera, which if you're using a mic right on the camera, that can be kind of distracting. All right, here's your USB cable. If you have hopes of like connecting this up to your camera, this up to your computer, transferring your files that way, don't. Unfortunately, I don't know why Sony has made this a USB 2 device, not a USB 3, so the speeds are very slow, unfortunately. So let me show you an example over here. On the left-hand side, we've got the USB 3 card reader with a good card in it. And it's pretty much a full 64 gig card. It took 12 minutes, whereas the other method using the USB cable took 46 minutes. You can see that one on the left is going 80 meg, whereas the other one is going 20 meg. So a big difference there. So don't use this cable for transferring files. All right, so this cable is definitely not useless. You can update the firmware with it, or in this case, you can actually plug it in, and you're gonna see an amber light appear right about now. There it goes. And that indicates that it is charging. You can't do 2 things at the same time. It can't charge as well as operate the camera. Either you turn the camera off, it'll charge, turn the camera on, you'll see that amber LED goes out, and basically it's receiving power from the wall. I guess it bypasses the battery altogether, I'm guessing. You'll actually see a, if I hit the display here, you'll actually, next to the battery, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's an actual indicator next to the battery showing that it's receiving power from the wall. So in the box you get a charger and 2 batteries. I actually label them because I have so many of these batteries. I want to know the year and the month that I actually purchased them because I want to know which one's the newest sometimes. So you'll get about an hour, hour and a half on these batteries, depending on how you have your camera set up. We're going to talk more about things that you can do to save battery life. If it's really, really cold, like I remember one time I shot, it was -3 degrees Fahrenheit, and I only got 20 minutes out of this battery. So depending on how your camera set up, how you're shooting, you should get between an hour to an hour and a half out of these batteries. All right, right here we have an HDMI connector protector, I guess you could call it, in the box. And I've gone ahead and mounted. It's not that hard. A spring-loaded screw, you just screw that in, and then you screw that in, and then it's nice and snug where the camera's not going anywhere. Now, there's 2 different ways to think about this. Because if you ruin the HDMI connector on the camera, and it's physically mounted to the circuit board, which I'm not sure it is, but I know with the Canon cameras it was. If you were to send it repair, with Canon, you'd pretty much have to replace the whole entire circuit board, which could A, take a long time, and B, be a lot of money. Whereas this method, if obviously if this cable is going along the floor to, let's say, a monitor, and the camera's on a tripod, somebody comes along and trips on this cable, well, the whole tripod's coming down. It could smash the lens, it could break the camera, it could be other things versus it, just the HDMI connector coming right out. So yeah, you got to figure out which situation you're in, what will work better for you. But I'd say probably out in the field, this might be your best bet to keep that HDMI connector safe. All right, obviously SD cards don't come with the camera, unfortunately. But let me go over a few requirements that you're going to need to shoot 4K at the best codec. The first requirement, it's got to be between 64 gig and 128 gig. They say it's proven to 128. You could probably go to 256 by now. It probably works fine. The next requirement is you want to be SDXC. And the last requirement is you want to have on the card written somewhere where there's a U with a 3 inside of it. So a 3 with a U around it, basically. This one actually, I'm actually using some of my other cards right now and I can't even demonstrate. But this one actually works. This is a one from SanDisk, and actually I bought it for my GoPro for 4K, and it works on this one. This is the SanDisk Extreme Plus. And it says 64 gig, and it's got a 3 with a U inside of it. The ones that in the other camera, and what I'll do is I'll put a link down below here to my gear page, and you can see all the cards and where you could buy them on B&H. I usually have the Extreme Pro, that's 95 meg in terms of its speed, write and read, about, and that's what's great. Like I said before, if you're transferring with that USB 2 cable, it's going to go very slow. Where you get these faster cards, you're going to be editing so much faster. I own all SanDisk cards, and it was funny because on the last course on the A7R2, I was talking about, and they've never failed me, and which was true at that point. And as soon as I had recorded that segment, one of my cards went bad. And it was just really weird. I'd run a bunch of tests with SanDisk, and they had to send it, and they just sent me another one. So in terms of buying good quality cards, SanDisk has been great for me over the years. Only had one failure, and they replaced it pretty quickly. All right, really quickly, I just want to add an update to that previous section on SD cards. There's already been a firmware update during the recording of this course, which sometimes can take me months. And we're now on 2.10. When we started, it was 2.00. So what does it do? Basically, it gives it the capability of recording on SDHC cards. I know I just said SDXC will be the only one you can record for XAVCS. I know there's a lot of letters in there, but basically the SDHC cards are usually ones that you can find easier and sometimes are less expensive. And what I'll do, I haven't even tested this yet, and I'm sure it works, but I want to know which cards work from my inventory. And what I'll do is update my page, my gear page. So if you're shopping for cards right now, you just got the camera and you want other options for cards, take a look at my gear page and I'll show you what I am currently using after I'm done recording this course. Now, while this camera has a bunch of seals on it and it is supposed to be somewhat resistant to dust and moisture, I have talked to some of the Sony reps about this issue in terms of how wet you can get it. For instance, like wet snow or drizzle or hard rain. The general rule of thumb, everybody I've talked to, it pretty much says the same thing. If you can't stand the rain yourself, then your camera probably can't either. And it depends what lens you've got mounted on too, because if your lens is not sealed very well, you could have issues there as well. But in terms of the body, if it's getting pretty wet, you might want to cover it or do something else with it. Now, this camera that's just out of frame, the A7S that I've had for a couple of years now, I've gotten it pretty wet. I mean, water's beading up on it. I've got it like soaked with snow. I've got it, you know, like where things are starting to freeze in the camera, like doing a time lapse. Still working today. So don't take that as any indication that you can do it, but I've gotten away with it myself personally. But basically the biggest rule of thumb is if it's starting to rain pretty hard, then your camera probably can't take it. So don't push it too far. All right, next up I want to talk about cleaning the screen. One of the things that says in the manual is you don't want to push too hard into the camera. I think this screen actually looks a bit different than the screen on my A7S, which is just out of frame. That one has some issues. Let me show you some B-roll of that one. And as you can see, as when I'm tilting it up, you can see it's got kind of stuff going on around the edge of the frame. That hasn't happened on some of my other cameras that I had since then, but maybe I've been pushing in too hard when I've cleaned it. I don't really think so, because you know, I read the manual because I'm doing these courses. I read the manual and I've never like really pushed hard into it. But one of the things I'll just say is just because you can see from the A7S original that I did have some issues, just don't push into the screen too hard. Back in my Canon days, I had a DSLR, which meant there was a mirror box protecting the sensor. This is something I wouldn't advise you doing, having the dust falling down into the sensor like this. So one of the things I want to recommend is when you're changing the lens, try to tip the camera downward a little bit so stuff doesn't fall down on top of it. So we don't have a mirror box there to help protect the sensor. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a blower like this one. This one's been great, especially on this camera. I have to use it more than my DSLRs. And I'll just blow just a little bit like that, mount the new lens or whatever, and then I'm good to go. So just want to be aware that since we have a mirrorless camera, the sensor's right there and it's going to get dusty a lot faster than your old DSLR. All right, we're going to shoot our very first video really quick. Take your card, SD card, put it in. It's keyed, it can only go in one way. Don't force it. Same thing with the battery, it's keyed, it can only go in one way. Take your lens, white dot to white dot. Here's a nice click, turn the camera on. And in terms of the mode, you could be in pano, you could be in movie, you could be in aperture priority, shutter priority, doesn't matter. Just hit record button on the side, you're recording video. And you're gonna be like, Dave, well, wait a minute, that's way too easy. That's true. Now, you could do this exercise if you want to, but basically what I want you to do is like go from an indoor area to an outdoor area or vice versa. And what I want is, because it's going to be a fully auto, if you just bought the camera, you haven't made any changes to it. Obviously made changes to it, it's not going to do this, but it's going to be, you know, autofocus, auto ISO, auto exposure, auto everything. And I want you to experience what that's like, because we're going to be doing some other exercises later and I'll explain why. Because what I want you to do is basically shoot indoor to outdoor, bring your footage in, take a look at it and see what's happening. You'll probably notice it's gotten pretty noisy. The camera's making a lot of judgments on its own and it's not working well. But it'd be fun if you wanted to experience the fully auto mode that it comes with when you first get the camera. So I know a lot of people are going to consume this course in a lot of different ways. Some people are going to have the camera with them while they're watching the course, and they're going to be making changes along with me. Or some people might just breeze through it, skip around. Well, however you want to consume the course, that's fine. But I thought this first exercise is kind of fun because later on when we start doing things fully manual, you'll have an idea of what it was like to shoot it fully automatic and what the footage looks like. All right, next up I'm going to give you a tour around the camera. And as I'm giving a tour, I'm going to be customizing some of the buttons. What I want you to do first, however, is go ahead and press the menu button, go to the last tab, and where it says version, go ahead and press that. You'll notice that right here I'm on version 2.00. You might be on a different version. You might be on version 1. You actually might be on a newer version. If you're on this particular version, everything that I'm going to show you in the menu should look exactly the same. There's a possibility if you're on a later version than this, there might be a little bit difference. All right, first up is the shutter button. Very intuitive, takes pictures while you're in stills modes, but when you're in video mode like I am now, if you press the shutter button, it doesn't do anything, unfortunately. If it was like the GH4, it'd be great. You could press the shutter button because your finger is like right there, and it'd be a great way to start and stop the recording versus the button over here on the side that we'll get to later. Next up is the power button. Very intuitive. The only thing I want to say here is when you turn the power off, it doesn't kill the power altogether within the camera. If you have an application that is crashed, basically you want to do is pull the battery out, put it back in, it should reboot just fine. The only thing I want to say is if you put a fresh new battery in, it's going to take a lot longer for it to boot up rather than turning the camera off, turning it back on with the same exact battery. All right, right here is your IR sensor. I use a remote actually to activate this camera and this camera at the same time. And let me show it to you. It's the RMT845. I don't think you can actually buy these. They come with cameras, certain cameras, usually high-end cameras, like maybe like the FS5 or other cameras. I love it. You can actually use an app to start and stop recording as well, but I like just using this because I don't have to have my phone being used for other things, which is great. Also, right in this area, right here is where your Wi-Fi antenna is located. All right, right here is your lens mount release. You just basically push it in, and you don't have to push it in when you mount the lens. Very intuitive. All right, right here is your AF illuminator. Now, this can be very useful. It lights up basically as a red lamp that lights up when you're in very dark situations. Now, if you're shooting video and you want to grab focus on something that's really dark, instead of shining a flashlight on it, grabbing focus, turning the flashlight off, and then shooting, what you can do is go to a stills mode. It won't work in any sort of the video mode. Go to the stills mode, not in continuous autofocus, a regular focus method. What you want to do is press the shutter halfway down, it'll grab focus, and then you can go ahead and start your movie recording. As long as you stay the same distance. It's a pretty useful tool when it's really dark. This is your sensor. Don't worry, I'm not even getting close to touching it, and you don't want to touch it. And then right here are all your pin contacts. This is your eyepiece cup, and this is your viewfinder, or I might actually call this the EVF, which stands for electronic viewfinder. And then right here is your eye sensor. So as you bring the camera up to your face, basically what's going to happen is the display will turn off, the EVF will turn on, and as you pull the camera away from your face, the opposite happens. All right, next up is your dioptric adjustment. Basically, you just take your finger and rotate it, and what you want to do is put your lens cap on, turn the camera on so you have a lot of text on there, go in and just move it around until all the text becomes very clear. The reason I say put the lens cap on is because you don't want to be focusing what's in the frame. You want to just focus what's on in terms of the text, the display. This is your C3 button. It's a customizable button. Each one of these buttons usually has two roles. One is during acquisition, like you're trying to acquire an image, and the second one is actually playing it back. Let's talk about playback first. So if I go here, I hit the play button, you'll actually see I'm shot a picture of the camera that I'm filming myself with. And if I press the C3 button, it basically punches in, and then you can cursor around and you can actually see the image, which is great. And if to get out of it, just hit the menu button. Now if I go actually to another image, this is with I actually shot a video. If I press the C3 button, you'll notice that it's unable to magnify because you can't punch in or magnify on a video file. So using this button while you're trying to acquire an image, I've actually changed it. If you hit the menu button, I'll actually show you what I've changed it to. Under custom key settings, on the second tab over, 6th page, all the way down, you'll see that if I go all the way down to custom button 3, you'll see that I'm on focus mode, which is, I believe, different than what it comes default as. Now, I know a lot of people will use this camera a lot of different ways. If you're shooting documentary versus shooting weddings, I'm sure everybody's going to have their camera set up totally different. Maybe they're like their fingers aren't long enough or whatever. But basically what I like to do is I like to have this right here for when I want to change focus modes. Maybe that's something you don't do that often. You might want to assign this button to something else. But for me, I like to be able to turn autofocus on and off quite quickly. All right, right here you have a lever switch that switches between autofocus, manual focus, and auto exposure lock. So we're going to explain about this button and the lever switch in playback mode first. So I've hit play, and if I hit the button once, you'll see it comes up with a grid view. If I hit it again, it comes up to calendar view. If I bring the lever switch down, hit the play button again, the exact same thing happens. It has those different views that you can go through. Now, when you're acquiring image, I've assigned this button right here to IAF. Here, I'll show you real quick. Go down here to the top one. It says IAF. Basically, it's a photography type of thing. It's not a button I use that often, but when I'm taking pictures, I'll press and hold, and then the green box will actually appear on somebody's eye, like if you're doing a portrait and if they're close enough. So photography-wise, I really like using it. It's a powerful tool. And then if I bring the switch down to AEL, when I press this, it basically brings the grid on, which we'll talk more about later. So if you're wanting to film within just in that area, your framing wise, it's really easy to toggle on and off. This is not something I get to that often, but it's kind of nice to have it right there on that button so you don't have to deep dive into the menu. This is our rear dial, and as you can see when I move it around, I am changing the shutter speed right here. So it's mostly for changing the shutter speed and exposure. If you hit the menu button, you can also see that I can toggle around this way. And then also if I hit the C1 button, which is our magnify button we'll get to later, and I move this, you can see I can move the box around this way as well. All right, right here is our movie record button. A terrible location. Let me demonstrate. So if I hold this up to my eye and I hit record, the camera just did some shaking, and then I'll probably put my recording, and then I hit it again, the camera shakes. So in the edit process, I'll have to trim the beginning and the end off, which is kind of unfortunate because the camera's shaking. Now, the best place for it is right here on the shutter button, but if I press the shutter halfway down or full all the way down, it'll say, hey, I can't record movie using that button. Unfortunate. So what I've done is I've actually remapped this to the C2 button, like right here. And so everybody's going to be different on this one, but for me, the best part is the best location is right here on the shutter, but if I move my finger over, and I guess I have maybe longer index fingers, is I press the C2 button and it works great and there's no wobble or shake. So to map that out the way I have it anyway, you can go to custom key settings, then go down to the C2 button and assign it to movie. Your FN button stands for function button. Let's do playback first. So if I press play and I press the function button, it's this little symbol right next to it. It's like a smartphone with an arrow going to it. It's like basically what it says. It's like, do you want to send this image to your smartphone? If you got it all set up, the Wi-Fi and all that stuff, we'll kind of talk about that later. This is the way you would do it. Now, if you're acquiring an image and you hit the FN button, you're going to have a lot of different things here. So first thing I want to say is set up all your C1 through C4 buttons. These are things you get to all the time. This area right here is kind of like your secondary. This is like, you don't want to deep dive into the menu because the Sony menu system can be quite confusing. So you want to get things that you go to a lot quickly. Now, the way I've got it set up might be totally different the way that you've got it set up. And I'm just going to go through this really quickly to show you what I've got. The first one is drive mode, because in photography I like to be able to burst or not burst. I have the creative style, picture profiles. I change those a lot, so I have them right there at my fingertips. Sometimes I do use DRO. We'll get into what that is later. Focus area, I want to be able to change the way it focuses quickly. Smile face detect, if you want to draw a box around somebody's face, and if I'm using a gimbal, I can turn that on and off quite quickly. Peaking, let's say somebody's wearing a red dress and I've got the peaking set to red color. That might not work so well, so I might want to change that color quite quickly. Metering mode, you might want to change the way the light meter reacts quickly. going in here. Silent shooting if you're a wedding photographer, which I am not. But sometimes I like to be able to shoot silently and nobody's noticing that I'm actually taking pictures, like especially in behind the scenes type stuff. These last three, to be honest, I'm going to probably change them because I don't use them that often anymore. The only one I really do is this one where I turn steady shot on and off. I used to have Canon lenses, and that's why I've got these set up. This is a way to manually go in and set your focal length and do some other things really quickly. And we're going to cover steady shot more in detail later. All right, you see a whole bunch of letters appeared. I'll explain those here in a second. Right here is your jog wheel, or it's actually called the control wheel. And this is your center or select button. We'll get to that here in a second. So in terms of exposure, I love have everything on a dial. So right here you can see I'm changing the aperture, and on the rear dial you can see I'm changing the shutter, and on this dial you can see that I'm changing the ISO. So if you go into your custom key settings, this first one that's called control wheel, I set it to ISO. Works great. That's just the way I shoot. I like getting to all my exposure stuff quite quickly on a dial. The center button I've assigned to a zoom, so I can rock back and forth, I guess you could say. It's not like a rocker zoom, but I can basically zoom in and take this 35mm lens that I've got right here and make it into more like, I don't know, like a 50mm. I haven't done the calculations, but you can use clear image zoom, digital zoom, a lot of different zooms. I'd stay away from the digital zoom. Clear image zoom actually works really well. We'll get more into that later. Starting at the top here where it says DISP, display, if you toggle through this, if you keep pressing, you'll have a lot of different displays. Like here we have our histogram and our audio meters. This is where we have our, you can see our, let me see if I can get it to do it. It's all wonky because it's pointing straight down, but that indicates how level you are, electronic level. If I hit again, you can see we get a whole bunch of information. Hit it again, it basically cycles through. W, where the W is, that's where ISO used to be. And then W for me is just white balance. And the reason I put these labels here, and I don't need them anymore because I've done this on all my Sony cameras, and they'll actually wear out after some time. But once your muscle memory gets there, you really don't need them. They'll actually kind of flake off after a while. But it's nice having them there just so you know, oh, this is white balance, this is peaking, this is zebras. These are the things I need to get to a lot. So if I hit white balance, you can see I get to that quite quickly. And then P down here, I can turn the peaking on quite quickly. And if I hit the Z over here, you'll see I can turn zebras on quite quickly. Especially when it comes to zebras and peaking. Those are two items, like when you're setting up for a shot, you've got your exposure right in terms of the zebras, you've got your focus right in terms of peaking. Now you want to look at the image cleanly. You want to be able to toggle those things off quite quickly, and that's why I want to be able to get them really quickly and have those mapped to these positions right here. And again, you can do this all within the custom key settings for all these buttons that I've just talked about. All right, if we go into playback mode, really quickly I'm just going to demonstrate. So if I hit the display button, you can see that it brings up all the information even in playback, and then we can play and we can actually toggle through the RGB, a whole bunch of other information. If I hit the white balance, you can see I'm just basically toggling back and forth between the different images. If I hit the P button, basically it brings up the volume setting. These are things that you can't change. So next up is the C4 button. If I press this, you'll notice that I've got this assigned to audio record level. That's basically the amount of input gain that you're applying to the preamp within the camera. Now, just to demonstrate, I'm using the A7R2, and I'm using the Rode VideoMic Pro right here, and I've got this turned all the way down to 1 in this configuration. And let me be totally quiet here for a second. You can hear how clean this preamp is when you turn it all the way down to 1. It's pretty quiet. So this microphone right here is doing most of the work. I've got that boosted like plus 20, and I'm about 2 feet away from the microphone. I'm not talking that loud, and it works quite well. Now, if you turn this all the way down to 0, you're not going to get any audio at all. It's like turning the audio off. Now, for the microphones that are mounted internally, right up here, I usually, if I'm not using the VideoMic Pro, nothing's connected into the camera for a microphone, I'll set it around 20, and that usually picks up pretty good scratch audio for what I'm doing. All right, you can see there's a little activity going here with the lamp access light. You can see it's flashing red. That basically means either something being played back or something is being recorded to your SD card. It's basically three things you don't want to do while this is flashing. You don't want to pull the battery, you don't want to pull the SD card, or you don't want to turn the camera off. There's a possibility that the file might not close properly. So when you go to play it back on your computer, it might be corrupt or didn't close properly, so it just might not work. So don't do those three things if the light is flashing. All right, next up is your play button. Pretty intuitive. You hit play, the image comes up. The only other thing that it can do is if you hit play again, it'll send you back to more of the acquisition mode. This circle with a line through it is where the image sensor is located in the camera. So right about here. And if you're wondering, I label all my cameras because especially I have like identical twins. The A7R2 and the A7S2, when you're looking directly down at it, look identical. And I want to be able to reach to the camera and grab it quickly. That's why that big label's there. So if I hold, actually, I'm just going to hit the shutter. I'm in photography mode. I'm just going to hit the shutter halfway down. You can see it locked on about, I don't know, 5 feet away. If I put my hand right in front of the lens and I press the shutter, nothing's happening. It can't acquire focus like it can like right there. So on every lens, at the very bottom usually, you'll see that it shows its minimum focus distance. And since I'm in the United States, I think that's 1.15 feet. So that's at like 13, maybe 14 inches. So if you're actually to measure from this little line right here, like let's say 13.5 inches, and I hold my hand out there, like right there, and I press the shutter halfway down, it can lock on. But if I move my hand slightly closer to that, you can see now it's not locking on. So that's basically what that distance marker is for. All right, I don't know how well you can see it, but there's two little holes right here. That's where your speaker's located. The only thing that really worries me about this is when water beads up on the camera, if it's raining or misting or whatever is happening. I think the camera's pretty well sealed. I'm guessing water shouldn't go down there and then get into the circuit board. I'm hoping it's sealed, but I don't know, maybe blowing up, get the water out later. But I've never had any problems. I've had the A7S original for quite a while, and I've got it wet many times, and it has the same type of configuration, and I've never had any problem with the speaker. All right, behind these two covers, we've got our microphone input. It has a little icon, but they're so hard to see. I usually can just memorize the colors. And then green is your headphones. And then these two right here, this one is your HDMI, so you could go out to an external recorder, actually like I'm doing right now. Just above me is the A7S original. There is the connected to the HDMI, and I'm actually going to the Shogun, which is out of frame, so I can actually see what I'm doing. So it's very useful. And then right here in between the two, we've already talked about, there's a little amber LED that turns on when it's being used in terms of the USB, in terms of charging, or when you're using it powered from the wall. And then right here is your USB connector. And these doors are pretty well sealed in terms of keeping the weather out. I've never opened these back up again and saw like moisture inside of them. All right, this is your hot shoe. Inside the hot shoe, there's a ton of pins right up front here. You want to, definitely protect it with this protective cover. Just put that on there if it's raining. That can be used for an external microphone mount system, and I'll show you some B-roll of what that looks like. It's kind of cool because you can actually run XLRs to it. So you could run microphones very long distance where, the microphone I'm using right here is unbalanced, and I can only run it maybe 15-20 feet before it might start getting interference. So you definitely want to watch out for that. But if you need to long XLR cable runs, you might look into that. The only thing that's unfortunate about that particular unit, I've tried it, I've tested it, it's a little bit noisy compared to using this type of microphone. All right, this is your mode dial. It's always locked. In order to turn it, you have to press it down and then rotate it. Let's step through them really quick. This is pano, this is scene, auto, P for program, A for aperture, S for shutter priority, M for full manual. This is memory number 1, memory 2, and we're back to movie. All right, you got your C1 button, C2 button. C2 button we've already talked about and we've assigned to the record button. C1 button I've let totally default. I like it where it is. It's basically what it is to punch in and zoom in on a certain object. What's great about this camera is you can actually hit record, and hit the C1 button, and it'll punch in on the recorded image, and then you can grab focus, fine tune it from there, and punch back out if you need to. Fantastic. I love having that feature. All right, this is your exposure compensation dial. This is mostly meant for photography, but if you really wanted to, you could put your camera like an aperture priority, and if you needed to be brighter, you could rotate it this way, or if you needed to be darker, you could bring the exposure down this way. But man, I would not recommend doing it that way. All right, real quick, this is the 2 holes right here for your neck strap. And remember, I took off those little triangular shaped doohickeys. I don't even know what they're called. There's nothing in the manual what they're called. But basically, that's for your neck strap. I take them off because, like I said before, they kind of jingle and make noise when I'm recording. All right, right here where you see the M, that stands for NFC. That's where I guess the NFC antenna is located. So if you have an Android phone and you take your phone and put it up to the camera like this, and you've got it set up properly, it should transfer the image to your phone. I am an iPhone user. I can't demonstrate this. I believe my iPhone has NFC, but I don't think Apple has let Sony use their API or whatever it needs to use in terms of making that work, but I can't demonstrate it for you. But the only thing that I want to mention about this is if you use a metal cage, you put a metal cage around here, they say not to put metal right next to the NFC. So if you have that feature turned on in the menu, you might think twice about it. I don't know if it harms anything, but having metal there, what I'm going to guess is the NFC is just not going to work very well. And the final thing on the tour is the battery compartment door, which might sound pretty obvious. The only thing I want to mention right here is this little thing right here you can flip out. So you can actually have a dummy battery inside and have the cable pass through right here. I wouldn't recommend using it that way, because actually the way I'm using it right now on the A7R2 is I'm actually using USB power and I'm plugging it right into the wall outlet over here. And so that camera just keeps running and running, which is fantastic. Instead of using some sort of dummy battery through this type of pass-through. So that's the end of our tour around the camera.